Hi, guys! Today, we'll be recapping a story called I Became the Stepmother of a Terminally Ill Child. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Enjoy! On a day woven with destiny, an enchanting silver-haired woman named Clarisse gathers children around her. With a gentle voice, she spins a tale that captures their hearts. As the story ends, the children rush to her side, pleading for more. Overwhelmed yet smiling softly, Clarisse humors their playful requests. But the moment is cut short. A voice calls out, their guardians have arrived. The children scatter, running into the arms of their mothers, leaving Clarisse standing quietly, watching their small figures fade into the distance. A surge of purpose wells within her, reminding her why she carries on. This place is her mother's legacy. After her father's death, her mother became a countess and built a haven for children who lost one or both parents. A home where hope could live again. But her mother passed before the dream could be fulfilled. Now Clarisse shoulders the burden, refusing to let it die, no matter the cost. Her thoughts are interrupted by an announcement. Her family has arrived. Soon, she finds herself seated at a long table with her uncle, Count Nocturnal, his wife, and their daughter Annette. They greet her with unusual warmth, celebrating her birthday as if they've always cherished her. But Clarisse knows better. After her mother's death, they moved into her home under the guise of caring for her, only to seize the estate and erase her existence. Why this sudden affection now? The answer comes swiftly. A royal envoy enters bearing her mother's last will and testament. The verdict is clear. All assets of the late Countess Nocturnal belong to her rightful heir, Clarisse. The revelation stuns her, though her thoughts race not to wealth, but to the children and the promise of securing her mother's dream. Yet across the table, Count Nocturnal's hopeful expression betrays his greed. But then the envoy adds a cruel twist. The inheritance can only be claimed in the presence of Nocturnal's magic stone. The stone is missing. Tension fills the room. The Count's mask slips, his hostility aimed squarely at Clarisse, leaving her vulnerable and cornered. Still, she notices something, Annette's suspicious behavior. With quiet determination, Clarisse follows her cousin, leading her straight to the estate of Duke Vandelrick. There, the truth is revealed. Annette sold the magic stone to the Vandelricks for nothing more than spending money. Now the challenge multiplies. The stone lies in the hands of Duke Vandelrick, a man feared for his ruthlessness. The odds are grim. But Clarisse cannot waver. She must reclaim the stone. She must protect the dream. She must fight for what is hers. Meanwhile, Clarisse's determination burns bright, yet fate seems stacked against her. The Duke of Vandelrick refuses to part with the magic stone. But Clarisse cannot surrender. She must find a way to reclaim what is rightfully hers. And as if the heavens answer her plea, the sound of a baby's desperate cry pierces the air, each wail pulsing with an overwhelming surge of magic. Fearing some dark deed, Clarisse rushes towards the cries, ready to protect the helpless child. Yet what she discovers leaves her trembling. Their family heirloom rests there. Before she can reach for it, a cold voice cuts through the air. The infamous Duke Albert Vandelrick steps forward, holding out a rattle with unsettling calm. His gaze brims with hostility, yet something shifts when Clarisse cradles the baby's presence with ease. The child stops crying while holding her finger. Intrigued, Albert commands her to follow, and Clarisse complies. Soon, she learns the truth. The baby is his adoptive son, Theo. Their conversation barely begins when Theo wails again, shaking the room with waves of raw magic. The Duke tries to calm him, only to be met with the rattle once more. Clarisse intervenes, her gentle touch quieting Theo instantly. Amazed, Albert studies her closely. She explains her years of caring for children in her mother's facility, a past that now grants her the gift of calming this fragile boy. Yet something disturbs her. The air itself ripples with every cry. She is right. Albert reveals the tragic truth. Theo's body cannot contain the vast magic he releases. Because of this, he has only 3 months left to live. The magic stone, once their family's treasure, is now tied to Theo's fragile survival. Then comes Albert's offer. If Clarisse agrees to care for Theo, he will give her the stone she so desperately seeks. She hesitates, her gaze softening on Theo's innocent face. In truth, she has nothing to lose, only the chance to save a child and secure her mother's dream. Before sealing the contract, Clarisse adds one demand of her own, that Albert vow to protect the facility and its children. To her surprise, he accepts without hesitation. But just as the moment steadies, Rusty, the Duke's bold butler, blurts out an outrageous suggestion. Why not solve everything at once? Why not propose marriage to Clarisse? His words draw horrified stares from both the Duke and Clarisse, only to be shattered by a tiny, innocent voice. Theo, oblivious to the weight of their world, clings to Clarisse and calls her Mama. The room falls still, hearts skip a beat, and in that single word, an impossible bond begins. After Theo's scandalous declaration, Rusty escorts Clarisse to the boys' chamber, introducing her to the duties that now rest on her shoulders. Plans are made to run tests, hoping to uncover the mystery of her unusual bond with Theo. Clarisse also reveals a shocking truth. She possesses no magic at all, and yet she alone can soothe a child overflowing with it. The paradox only deepens the intrigue. Later, Clarisse sits at her desk writing a tender letter to the children back at the facility. But before her thoughts can take shape, Theo's sudden cry pierces the air. She rushes to fetch fresh clothes for him, only to be met with a startling sight. A red-eyed boy seizes Theo and dashes toward the terrace, leaping into the void. Without hesitation, Clarisse lunges forward, grasping the boy's arm in a desperate bid to save them both. But her strength falters, and all three plunge together. By some miracle of magic, they land safely on the ground. Clarisse, shaken yet gentle, extends kindness to the mysterious boy. But her warmth is met with sharp hostility. He clings to Theo, refusing to hand him over as the infant wails. Rusty arrives breathless, only to freeze at the sight before him. Clarisse's arms bear deep scratches from the fall. Yet the real shock comes when the red-eyed boy steps forward, channeling powerful healing magic through his small hands. A gift so rare, so unthinkable. The truth spills forth. The boy is Lord Eric, Albert's other adoptive son. Fiercely protective of Theo, Eric shields him with unrelenting devotion. His suspicion of Clarisse runs deep, his cold gaze shadowing her every move. Yet beneath the frost lies a quiet affection. He trails her footsteps, ensures Theo's safety, and even tastes the boy's meals before him, just to guard against poison. Adorable or overbearing? Perhaps both. Still, Eric refuses to yield his trust. Determined to expose Clarisse's so-called secrets, he spies on her relentlessly. Until one night he stumbles upon a sight more scandalous than anything he imagined. Clarisse, her hand cupping the Duke's face with tender grace, Albert, dripping wet, standing close beneath her touch. Oh my God, what exactly is unfolding here? Eric bursts into the scene, his accusing eyes fixed on Clarisse, who stands visibly flustered. Tension crackles in the air, and before he can lash out, Duke Albert steps forward, shielding her. Calmly, he explains the truth behind the moment Eric had misunderstood. Shame floods Eric's face as the weight of his assumption sinks in. He bows in embarrassment, only for Albert to remind him that marriage, especially with Clarisse, is not even on his mind. Ouch! No need to dismiss her so quickly, Duke! Sensing the awkwardness, Clarisse gently bridges the gap. After the Duke leaves, she invites Eric to join her in caring for Theo. Her heart softens as she watches the boy cradle his baby brother with remarkable tenderness, holding him as if he were made of glass. For the first time, Eric's guarded expression melts into a smile. He turns to Clarisse, curiosity flickering in his eyes, and asks how she became so good with children. Clarisse opens up about her mother's dream, the facility that now shelters orphans. The story strikes a chord. Orphaned himself, Eric feels a deep connection to Theo and the children who share their fate. With quiet resolve, he promises that one day he will visit the facility. Clarisse beams, relieved and delighted to see his walls slowly crumbling. Days pass and the bond between them improves, but Clarisse soon stumbles upon a heartbreaking sight. Eric standing before his tutor, being scolded harshly for his lack of skill in swordsmanship. The boy hangs his head in defeat. The cruelty of Eric's tutor weighs heavily on Clarisse's heart. Determined to speak up, she approaches Duke Albert, ready to defend the boy. But before she can utter a word, the Duke silences her with cold finality, ordering her to focus only on Theo and leave Eric's matters untouched. Disheartened, Clarisse bows her head in submission. Not long after, Rusty hears of the exchange. With quiet firmness, he reminds the Duke to be more careful with his words, urging him to show kindness where it matters most. Still, Clarisse cannot shake Eric from her thoughts. Yet duty calls. Theo's condition demands research, and so she wanders the Grand Library in search of answers. There, she finds Eric buried in a mountain of books on healing magic and medicine. Longing to comfort him after the morning's pain, she sits beside him, trying to reach out. But the boy, overwhelmed by her presence, bolts from his seat, leaving her behind in flustered retreat. Can't wait to see how their bond will turn out. These two. Later, in conversation with Rusty, Clarisse learns the truth about the brothers. Eric and Theo are not Alberts by blood. They are the orphaned sons of the Duke's elder brother and his wife, a woman once renowned for her extraordinary healing powers. When tragedy claimed their parents, Albert adopted them, raising them within his household. The revelation stirs something deep within Clarisse. Their story mirrors her own loss, binding her heart closer to theirs. The next morning, her fears are realized once more. The ruthless tutor berates Eric, words sharp enough to wound, and this time he raises his sword in rage. Clarisse does not hesitate. She steps in front of Eric, eyes blazing, shielding the boy with her own body. Her glare cuts like steel, a silent warning to the tutor. He will not harm the young lord, not while she still breathes. Definitely my fave duo. Clarisse's commanding voice cuts through the air as she shields Eric with fierce determination. The beast of a tutor even dares to slash Eric's precious notebook, the one filled with all his hard-earned knowledge of healing powers. Though trembling with rage, Clarisse keeps her composure, meeting cruelty with a smirk and sharp, cutting words. A strike well deserved. Her defiance only fuels the man's anger. Just as he raises his blade for another attack, his wrist is caught, crushed beneath the iron grip of Duke Albert. Fury radiates from the Duke as he grits his teeth, his eyes blazing. He claims Clarisse as his own, a bold declaration that clashes with his long-held vow of never marrying. Ahem. Oops. The tutor freezes, dumbstruck, and quickly masks his vile nature with a false bow of apology. But the Duke is not a man to be fooled. His piercing voice thunders with finality as he declares the tutor dismissed. Word of the man's misdeeds has long reached Albert's ears, and now justice falls swift and sure. At last, the wretch tastes his own medicine. After the storm, the Duke's expression softens when he turns to Eric. Guilt washes over him as he realizes how his worry over Theo's condition has left Eric overlooked and starved of affection. With heartfelt sincerity, he apologizes. To make amends, Duke Albert pledges to train Eric himself. This way, he can give the boy the time, care, and presence he deserves, a chance to forge a deeper bond. Days later, Clarisse speaks with Rusty about the astonishing scene she witnessed, the mighty Duke humbling himself before Lord Eric. Rusty explains that Albert has lived most of his life on the battlefield, and only recently stepped into his role as Duke after his brother's death. That stern aura surrounding him is simply the armor of a soldier learning to rule. Not long after, Clarisse and little Theo find themselves in the quiet of the greenhouse. With a gentle smile, she plays with the giggling child. And then, a miracle unfolds. At the sound of Theo's laughter, the flowers burst into radiant bloom, their petals lifting and dancing in a swirl of colors across the glasshouse. A breathtaking sight, as if the very world itself rejoices with him. As though summoned by an unseen urgency, Duke Albert strides swiftly into the greenhouse. The air is alive with the fragrance of blossoms in full bloom, yet his gaze halts upon one sight alone. Theo cradled in Clarisse's arms. Clarisse explains what she has just witnessed, a life-based magic awakened by Theo himself. To confirm the miracle, Albert tries to coax a smile from his son, but the moment Theo catches sight of his father's stern face, his expression twists with fear. How ironic and endearing that the mighty Duke terrifies his own child. Clarisse suppresses her laughter and carefully sets Theo down. Turning to Albert, she urges him to smile for his son. Yet what he manages is hardly gentle. It's the smile of a villain, sharp and shadowed by piercing eyes. With playful determination, Clarisse steps closer. She lifts the corners of his lips with her fingers, cups his face, and softens his gaze, coaxing out the warmth she longs to see. To her, it is a light-hearted gesture, but to Albert, the touch is disarming. Ensnared in the moment, he clasps the hand resting against his cheek, marveling at her lack of fear toward him. Theo watches them with innocent delight. His laughter rings out, and once more the greenhouse comes alive. Flowers unfurl in radiant glory, petals drifting like colorful confetti through the air. Their theory is proven that Theo absorbs mana when he smiles, and releases it when he cries, placing him in peril each time sorrow overtakes him. Not long after, Eric paces the corridors of the Vandalrick estate, his steps heavy with thought. Suddenly, a sound draws his attention. It comes from his baby brother's chamber. Curiosity leads him to peek inside, where his eyes meet a peculiar scene. Duke Albert beside Clarisse, who cradles Theo with profound gentleness, her gaze filled with adoration. Struck by the sight, Eric turns on his heel, retreating with urgent haste, as though the moment is too personal for him to linger upon. After witnessing that unforgettable scene, Eric begins to act strangely. One morning, as he feeds his baby brother, his mind drifts back to that picture. The Duke, Clarisse, and little Theo together. Lost in thought, he fails to notice the food spilling onto Theo's clothes. Sensing his distraction, Clarisse gently calls his attention with a reassuring smile. But Eric quickly hands Theo over to her and slips away, using training with the Duke as his excuse. Concerned, Clarisse secretly watches their training session. At first, everything seems fine until she sees Eric trembling, his small hands struggling to hold the sword. Terror flashes across his eyes as haunting images of his parents' lifeless bodies overwhelm him. Unable to bear it, Clarisse rushes in, her face etched with worry. Both Albert and Eric turn toward her. The Duke explains that he has been trying to tell Eric it's all right if he cannot wield a sword, but the boy refuses to give up. To Eric, the sword feels like a burden he must carry, as though failing means leaving it for someone else to bear. Albert makes it clear. He has never pressured Eric. He never cared whether the boy could wield a sword. Deep down, he expected this struggle. Eric is his brother's son, and like his father before him, he trembles at the very thought of battle. That was why Albert himself spent most of his life on the battlefield, to stand in the place of the late Duke. With tenderness in his voice, Albert kneels before Eric. He urges him to focus on magic, for that is where his true gift lies, and he reminds him he has Theo. What one brother lacks, the other will make whole. That is the strength of their bond. Eric's eyes brighten with newfound joy, his heart lifted by his father's words. He responds with eagerness, a spark of hope rekindled. The very next day, Clarisse notices the change. Eric is lighter, happier, and even shares something unexpected. Theo's birthday is coming. A birthday? For little Lord Theo? Oh dear, preparations must be made! A noble's birthday usually means a grand celebration, or so Clarisse believes. But when she asks Duke Albert about his plans for Theo's special day, his answer is firm. Theo's condition is too fragile for a carefree party, and while the reasoning makes sense, Clarisse senses there's something more he chooses not to reveal. She respects his silence, though the question lingers in her heart. The news weighs heavily on Eric. His disappointment is so clear that even little Theo, despite his age, feels the shadow of his brother's sadness. From then on, Eric distances himself, avoiding play so his younger sibling won't notice the sorrow he carries. Yet the effect is the opposite as Theo sulks, and not even Clarisse's efforts can brighten his spirit. With determination, Clarisse takes a stand. Together with Eric and Theo, she intercepts the Duke, pleading for at least a small and intimate celebration. Something simple, just enough to make Theo feel cherished. At last, Albert relents, granting his permission. The joy that bursts from Clarisse and Eric could lift them right off the ground. Soon, Theo sits at the center of a modest table surrounded by savory treats and his favorite, apple cake. His bright eyes reflect the warmth of the moment, as Clarisse and Eric beam at him with wide smiles, showering him with their love. Their giggles and greetings echo around the room. Then comes the gift. Eric, with heartfelt pride, presents his most treasured possession, a childhood plushie worn from years of affection. Though frayed, he has painstakingly mended it, stitching it back together so he could pass it on to his little brother. Clarisse then realizes that it's the reason why Eric holed up in his room for a very long time. How adorable! Lost in the celebration, none of them notice when Duke Albert and Rusty step quietly into the mansion. The Duke pauses, watching the scene unfold. The laughter, the smiles, the warmth he claims not to understand. When Rusty wonders if he will join them, Albert simply turns away, muttering that such things aren't for him. But perhaps not for long. The bonds within this household are growing, weaving tighter with each moment, and it is only a matter of time before even the stoic Duke is caught in their embrace. As Theodore cries in his crib, Duke Albert approaches him. As Duke Albert takes out the Nocturnal's heirloom and shows it to Theodore, he immediately stops crying as yellow sparkles shimmer around him. The experiment is a success! A few days ago, she decided to research the ducal family's unique magic along with her own calming magic. Only long-established noble families can wield unique magic such as this. The Nocturnal family has their own, but Clarisse still struggles to wield ordinary magic. Duke Albert reminds her that he can't return their heirloom just yet, but she reminds him about their contract. The heirloom begins to dim, indicating it can't be used repeatedly, but it will still buy them more time to extend Theo's life. Suddenly, Rusty appears with Theodore's personal nanny, Maria, his mother's magic-resistant maid and bodyguard. Duke Albert remarks that Clarisse will finally have time for herself. Then, Clarisse shamefully lowers her gaze and asks Duke Albert for a request. The next day, she informs Eric that she'll be studying about her family's unique magic. Before she leaves, Eric hands her a magic stone charm, telling her not to get the wrong idea. Clarisse feels touched by his kindness, as a magic stone only appears when someone uses their magic for the first time. To be given one symbolizes deep trust and protection. In the carriage, Lord Rusty remarks on Clarisse's necklace, saying Albert gave him the same one. Aw, Eric is so sweet. This is clearly a symbol of trust. She gazes out the window, wondering why no magic stone appeared when she first used her magic on Theodore. She might have used her magic before without even knowing. They arrive at the facility and are greeted excitedly by the children. Their attention shifts to Rusty and they decide to play with him instead. In the facility's office, she recalls that the important documents were moved to the estate office and asks Phi, the estate staff, to look for any documents about unique magic. Moments later, she walks through the facility's halls and hears the commotion stirring up at the front gate, and she quickly realizes who's causing it. It's Annette. As Annette argues with the guards, Clarisse appears and asks her to leave. Annette glares at her, thinking Clarisse is arrogant just because she's her cousin and she has guards at her side. Suddenly, she clings to Clarisse and embraces her around her arms, pretending to be concerned about her and the heirloom, but Clarisse pushes her away. Clarisse informs Annette that she's retrieving the heirloom from the ducal family, accusing her of it being in their possession. Caught in the act, Annette acts ignorant and hurt, denying the allegations Clarisse is throwing against her. The guards exchange whispers, and Clarisse recalls Annette and her family's actions. The elders try to take her wealth, but Annette is different. She turns people against Clarisse, even her own fiancé. She went as far as hurting herself to turn Clarisse's fiancé against her and put on an innocent facade. Such a two-faced brat! Definitely a pet peeve. By the time Clarisse realized Annette's act, it was already too late. Everyone had turned against her, and with nowhere else to go, she ran to her mother's inheritance, the child care facility. Right then, she holds the magic stone around her neck and recalls Eric's kind words. Since her mother's passing, no one else has waited for Clarisse to come home, but remembering Eric's trust makes her happy for a brief moment. Then she faces Annette and is determined to stop her from getting everything she wants. She firmly states that unless the contract is fulfilled, the heirloom will not return to the Nocturnal family. She walks away as Annette tries to explain, but Annette quickly stops her and holds Clarisse's necklace. She asks if it's also a family heirloom and suggests splitting it. Then she assures Clarisse that her family will handle the financial matters. Such an entitled brat! Furious, Clarisse raises her hand and slaps Annette, saying it's not their family heirloom. She tells her not to touch it with her filthy hands because it was given by someone precious to her. Annette trembles in rage, saying Clarisse is nothing but an inferior noble who's incapable of wielding magic. She casts a spell and shards of ice begin to charge at Clarisse, but suddenly the necklace levitates and glows. Annette forcefully gets pushed back, surprising Clarisse. It must be Eric's protection. Annette realizes the necklace is a high-quality magic stone and quickly gets an idea. She casts a spell, but not at Clarisse. Instead, her ice shards aim towards a child hiding behind a tree. Clarisse rushes toward the child, but suddenly someone snaps their finger, instantly creating a force field around Clarisse and the child, blocking Annette's magic. Then Rusty appears beside Clarisse and admits he's not skilled in attacking magic, but is skilled in defensive magic. He assures her that as long as the magic stone is with her, nothing bad will happen to her. Rusty's attention shifts to Annette. She casts another spell to attack Rusty, but her magic is blocked again. Clarisse remarks on Rusty's skills and strengths, and he leans closer and whispers, asking to keep his magic powers a secret. She quickly realizes that Rusty's abilities are for emergencies in case the Duke is endangered. So is he even supposed to be accompanying her at the facility? Rusty assures her, saying he'll protect anything the Duke wishes to protect. He turns to Annette and shows his magic stone necklace. He informs her it's from Duke Vanderlick, and that going against him and Clarisse means going against the Duke. He threatens her life for opposing them, scaring her away. Then Clarisse thanks Rusty and promises to show her gratitude to Eric and Duke Albert. Yeah, that's right. Teach that brat a lesson. As the sun sets, Duke Albert faces problems of his own. A mercenary is holding children hostage, threatening to execute them unless Duke Albert meets their demands. One of the hostages' fathers pleads with Duke Albert to save his son. The mercenary's accomplices further provoke him, asking if the rumors are true. A ruthless duke who sacrifices children. But Duke Albert only feels underestimated. Suddenly, Knight Commander Marvin appears with an army of knights. He remarks on the mercenary's foolishness in picking a fight with the Duke and teases Duke Albert about the rumors. Duke Albert's eyes sharpen as the hostage's father cries for help. He turns to the mercenary and his accomplices, wielding dark magic, pushing them away. No normal human can wield powers like that. Then he orders Marvin and the knights to subdue them. As they untie the hostages, a child runs to his father in tears. From behind, Duke Albert sneaks a smile, but suddenly a hooded child catches his attention. The knight leans closer and whispers to Duke Albert, alarming him with the information. Moments later, Duke Albert interrogates the mercenary, asking if he knew the child was of status. He asks if the child would have died if he failed to save him, and remarks that the mercenary's life won't be enough to make up for it. I'm really curious about who this child is. Suddenly, a knight intervenes in a panic, revealing they discovered fire-starting devices. Duke Albert turns to the mercenary once again and threatens him, but he promises to reveal the identity of the client he works for. As they walk out of the fort, Duke Albert informs Marvin that the mastermind is from the Nocturnal family, having recognized their magic. In the carriage, Clarisse thinks about her family's unique magic, the power of purification. It exercises dark magic, including malice and curses, realizing Theodore must be under a curse. They arrive at the Vanderlick Manor and are greeted excitedly by Eric and Theodore. Clarisse embraces Theodore as he calls her Mama, while Eric stops himself from showing his affection. Rusty reminds Eric of what to say, and Eric shyly welcomes Clarisse home before they embrace each other. Suddenly, he backs away and reveals he has something important to tell her about Theo. In the Nocturnal family's office, Count Nocturnal slams his coffee in rage at the mercenary's failure. Then he assures his wife that he still has a better plan in mind. Back at the Vanderlick Manor, everyone is gathered with anticipation to see Theodore stand on his 2 feet. Everyone is overjoyed to see him succeed, and Eric proudly reveals he taught Theodore a few standing tricks. They're growing up too fast. She remarks that Duke Albert must see Theodore and asks where he is, but Rusty explains he's on a short expedition. Remembering his usual cold expressions, Eric wonders if he'll be proud to hear Theodore standing. Suddenly, Clarisse thinks about getting Theodore his first pair of shoes. However, Rusty explains they can't have a shoemaker over without Duke Albert's permission. Another bright idea strikes Clarisse. She suggests going to town themselves and having Theodore's shoes made. As they walk through town, Eric notices Clarisse's gloomy expression and asks her to make the day about just the 2 of them, flustering her. Then Eric grabs her hand and they look around. Eric is so cute when he tries to show his affection. Just as Clarisse finishes picking out Theodore's shoes, she turns to Eric and gives him a present. Brown shoes. He can use the shoes when he plays with Theodore in the garden, and it's her way of showing her gratitude to him. They spend the rest of the day shopping in town. Moments later, they rest on the fountain's surface. Clarisse realizes how happy the townspeople are despite the horrible rumors of the ducal family. Suddenly, Rusty announces Duke Albert's return and a crowd quickly gathers. As Clarisse and Eric take a sneak peek, they see Duke Albert with a child who has the same eyes as him. The townspeople quickly exchange whispers and rumors, wondering who the child is. Stunned, Clarisse and Eric quickly turn to Rusty, asking who the child is. Some even speculate it's the Grand Duke's illegitimate child. After spending the day in town, Clarisse and Eric finally come home to the manor, where they are warmly greeted by Maria and Theodore. Clarisse asks about Duke Albert, but he interrupts, asking where they went. She explains they bought shoes for Theodore. They wait in anticipation for his reaction, but he simply lets out a sigh and says they've done a good job. Suddenly, his eyes widen upon seeing Clarisse's necklace, but before he could speak, Eric explains that he gave it to Clarisse since she's an indispensable person in their lives now. At least, to him. Duke Albert caresses Eric's hair and says he also did a good job. Moments later, he announces he has someone for them to meet, leaving them to wonder who it could be. It's the child they saw with Duke Albert in town, William. Eric introduces himself and they both shake hands with William. From behind, Clarisse can't help but see the resemblance between William and Duke Albert. Then Duke Albert orders Rusty to show William around the manor. Clarisse takes the opportunity to ask if William is Duke Albert's son. He confirms that William is Eric's half-brother, leaving them in shock. He says he was never formally married to his mother, but they must not become too familiar with him, especially Eric. He turns to Clarisse and asks about the Nocturnal's unique magic, but she interrupts him, saying she will write a written report about it. In Theodore's room, Clarisse writes her written report but is also lost in thought. In disbelief, she can't comprehend that the Duke, of all people, has an illegitimate child. She notices Eric is lost in his thoughts and suggests going for a stroll. As they walk through the garden, Clarisse thinks about her limited interactions with William and doesn't know how to bring up the topic. Suddenly, Eric asks about Clarisse's stepsister. She admits they don't get along, making life much lonelier than she was alone. I hope William and Eric will get along. Then she bends down and asks Eric what he wants to do with William, leaving him in deep thought. As Clarisse and Eric talk, Theodore jumps out of his crib and bumps into William in the garden. William instantly recognizes Theodore. Suddenly, a black cat with a ribbon appears and Theo scrunches its tail. William corrects him, telling him to be gentle when playing with the cat. They continue to play with each other, filling the garden with joy and laughter. William lowers his gaze, telling Theodore he was captured while accompanying the special commissioner. Though he won't be staying long in the manor since his escort will arrive soon. Suddenly, Clarisse and Eric rush to Theodore in a panic and quickly recognize who he's with. Clarisse greets and apologizes to William, but he remarks how Clarisse laid eyes off the baby. Eric defends her, saying he's at fault, but William doesn't buy it. They both end up defending each other, making William laugh. Then William extends his hand to Eric and asks him to be his friend, leaving him confused. William sulks and asks Eric if he wants to be friends with Dick instead. Eric and Clarisse connect the dots and immediately realize that William is the first prince of Audouron, who happens to have a brother named Dick, the second prince. Moments later, William laughs hysterically at their assumption of him being the illegitimate child of Duke Albert. He will always be Dick's older brother. Now that they have formally introduced themselves, he suggests playing Tag You're It. They play rock, paper, scissors to see who's the tag. William chooses scissors while Eric chooses paper. William starts running, saying it's him against Eric, Theodore, and Clarisse. As they play tag, Clarisse remembers that the royal palace's court is split into two factions. The first prince faction and the second prince faction to fight over the throne. She realizes that must be what Duke Albert meant about not getting familiar with him. From behind, William continuously dodges Eric's touch, making him fall to the ground. He teases Eric, saying he thought wrong of allying with Duke's House Vanderlick since the future Duke is Eric. He's not the ideal heir. Eric stands up and asks him not to judge the entire house because of him. He tries to catch him once more, but William dodges. Suddenly, he feels someone touch him from behind, only to realize it's Theodore who caught him. William laughs hysterically onto the ground. Eric extends his hand to William and smiles. He reveals what Duke Albert taught him. Whatever they lack, they make up for it as brothers. In disbelief, William takes his hand, not expecting Duke Albert to be that kind of man. From behind, Duke Albert glares as he watches them play together through the window. He informs Marvin that they must make a move. What kind of move are we talking about? Outdoors, Clarisse, Eric, Theodore, and William all gather around. This time, William apologizes for being mean to Eric. It was all an act to see how he would react towards him. With a genuine smile, he asks that they start again, offering his hand in friendship. What he doesn't expect, though, is for Eric to refuse. William is taken aback, but Eric uses his surprise as a chance to get a head start. Cheeky as ever, he runs off, leaving William as the next tagger. I just love how children are. They're always just so pure. They treat everyone equally. His antics make William burst into laughter, and soon enough he finds himself giving chase to the two brothers. As the children run off, Duke Albert suddenly appears behind Clarisse, giving her a slight fright. If he remembers correctly, he told her not to get too close to William, something she's clearly not taking seriously. Speaking freely, Clarisse voices her thoughts. Does the ducal family of Vanderlick intend to oppose Prince William? Nonchalantly, Albert explains that the ducal house remains neutral, siding neither with the first nor the second prince. Then again, a young child like Eric had no say in that neutrality. Just earlier today, Eric had expressed his desire to get to know William as a person away from the political landscape their positions have forced them into. It's exactly Eric's wish that Clarisse wishes to respect. Realizing that there's no reasoning with her stubbornness, Albert leaves her be, barely objecting to anything she's saying. Without another word, he leaves, calling William after him. They have important matters to discuss. Inside, Albert hands William a report of his earlier kidnapping incident. As they feared, it was the second prince's faction who orchestrated such a scheme. Knowing this, William bows, a gesture of respect and gratitude, and perhaps an apology too. He never meant for Albert to get caught in conflicts caused by royal succession. Albert nods, however, he reminds William not to bow so easily. He may be the child of a concubine, but that doesn't change the fact that he's still the first prince. Although it was implicit, William finds himself comforted by earning the Duke's recognition. Later that night, Rusty comes bringing a gift for Clarisse. It's an elegant dress from Duke Albert, who has requested that she accompany him to a ball as his partner. Cheeks burning, Clarisse doesn't know what to say. Seeing her confusion at the sudden request, Rusty explains the situation. The day they went to get shoes for Theodore, William's life was threatened by an assassination attempt. The kicker? Whoever orchestrated it tried to pin Duke Albert as the mastermind. Recently, they've received intel that the real mastermind would be attending a certain party, so naturally, the Duke is hell-bent on gate-crashing in the hopes of catching the real culprit. He'd need a partner to look less suspicious, of course. He reassures Clarisse not to worry about the children, though. Maria and a bunch of the most capable knights would be watching over them. Still, Clarisse isn't sold on the idea. That is until Eric himself convinces her to go. He just can't stand how the Duke is being accused of such crimes. Seeing how much this means to Eric, Clarisse accepts. For Eric and William's sake, at least. Soon, the night of the party is upon them. Albert and Clarisse make their entrance, their beauty and elegance capturing everyone's attention despite the masquerade. All of a sudden, Albert places a hand on her waist, pulling her closer to him. A deep hue of blush graces her cheeks, unaccustomed to being in close proximity to him. Albert, however, is unfazed as he simply remarks that he's got eyes on his target. The target in question is a man in an all-black ensemble. Fearing they'd get caught, Albert asks Clarisse to act naturally and join him for a dance. As they dance, Clarisse recalls all the times Annette received dancing lessons while she was deprived of them. Who knew that watching and practicing from the sidelines would come in handy someday? As the dance finishes, Albert leads her away, escorting her to a private room. It's a locked room he forced open with magic, a room intended for VIPs and royals only. He knows the mastermind is part of the second prince's faction, but he can't be too sure who it is specifically, so they might as well just sneak into the VIP chamber in advance and gather some evidence. Although the ducal house is neutral about the situation with the princes, Albert can't stay still as he's being framed for William's assassination. He absolutely has no plans of letting this slip. To his surprise, Clarisse encourages him, showing enthusiasm for his plans. He may be fueled by his own reasons, but so is she. She cannot stand how they tried to assassinate William, a literal child. Just then, two men enter the room, making Albert and Clarisse panic. Without warning, Albert pulls Clarisse into him, basically tackling her in a hug to conceal themselves. Miss, don't let the Duke's embrace distract you. Don't forget you have bad guys to catch. Hidden inside the closet, Clarisse becomes acutely aware of the fleeting distance between her and Albert. Ooh, I'm feeling the love thrill vibes now. But the murmur of voices just beyond the door snaps her back to reality. The people outside are discussing something sinister, and William's name is tangled with the Duke's. Phrases about ensuring the plan proceeds smoothly hang in the air, smelling unmistakably of trouble. And the scent of conspiracy doubles when the Marquise Clady comes in. People from the second prince's side are all gathered. The Marquise raises a question as to why the fake kidnapping became an attempted assassination, all plotted by none other than Clarisse's uncle? Triple the trouble. Arrogant as ever, the Count claims that he was only following orders. I don't buy it, old man. However, the Marquise doubts it, as it is far too dangerous and might pose a danger to the first prince. He then excuses himself to reconfirm that plan with a certain someone. Who could that person be? Out and about, the remaining nobles gloat with their smug-looking faces at the Count's words and his reputation for having successful plans and executions. There is no need to worry as they trust the Queen. As for William, he will simply disappear without a trace. The moment the room emptied, Clarisse let out a shuddering exhale, stumbling out of the closet. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her uncle is up to no good at all, and thus, with a voice thick with shame, she begs the Duke to punish her, as she is related to the Count. Agreeing with what she said, the Duke makes a small reconsideration for her. She may be from the Nocturnal family, but she is far too precious to his family. Aw, could this be something else? He asks her to trust him in such matters, and he will give the Count the best punishment possible. Back at the ducal estate, the pair find the two brothers fast asleep together. Rather adorably, too. Already exhausted from attending the social setting, aka the masquerade party, the Duke decides to sleep with the children since Theo almost fell and Eric is holding his hand. He even offers Clarisse to rest with them too? A wave of reluctance makes Clarisse hesitate, but Albert simply tells her to do what she wants. So much for the romantic moment, Duke. Feeling entirely uneasy, she finally settles nearby. Her anxiety melts away the moment a sleeping Eric instinctively reaches for her hand. The night shifts become a dreamlike solace for all four of them. Eric is the first to wake in the early morning, startled by the unusual sight of the two adults sleeping beside them. But his surprise quickly softens into a smile. It's a sweet, pleasant sight, like a big happy family. At the same time, Theo stirs awake, his cute little brain already buzzing with mischief. Eric just hopes he doesn't get involved in this. Sometime later, Clarisse wakes to a startling discovery. Her hand is laced with Albert's. Just when it feels like the start of something new, she panics. In a flustered mess, she rushes from the room, leaving a newly awakened Duke behind, the sensation of her warmth still lingering on his skin. The moment he arrives at his office, Marvin and Rusty are already teasing him about the scene. The Duke quickly brushes them off, despite the strange emotions swirling inside him. I'm telling you, I hear Cupid calling. Meanwhile, Clarisse is in a daze with the children. Maria interrupts her swirling thoughts to explain that it was Theo who laced their hands together as a silly prank. William attempts to apologize on behalf of the infant, but Clarisse dismisses it as her and the Duke's fault, and even apologizes for him. Girl, you do not need to apologize for that big oaf. The children then reveal they are aware of the assassination plan, assuring her it is okay and not her fault. It seems Albert thinks so too. Fueled by their support, Clarisse expresses her desire to cut all ties with the Count for the greater good. Yes! Overjoyed by her confession, Eric presents her with a thick stack of papers. It appears to be a detailed strategic plan against the Count, designed by him and William. William begins by outlining the situation, explaining how the kingdom is sharply divided between two factions loyal to the two princes, himself and his younger half-brother Dick. The latter is heavily influenced by the Queen, William's stepmother. He recounts how the Queen was originally wedded to the king as part of a peace treaty. Unable to bear children, she saw William born to a concubine as a threat. Her own son Dick was born soon after. However, with a little native support, the Queen relies on foreign alliances and a handful of greedy nobles who cling to her for wealth and influence. People like Count Nocturnal. Well, Clarisse never needed much convincing about her uncle's character. He always had a sleazy air about him. But who knew his ambitions ran so deep, aiming not just for her magic stone and her inheritance, but to plot the kidnapping of the first prince? A large bulb suddenly lights up for both William and Eric as they listen. William pieces it together, concluding that the Count hasn't given up on the magic stone. Fueled by this realization, the two boys dive into crafting an even more brilliant plan, making swift revisions with intense focus. The little scene brings a faint smile to Clarisse's lips, a warm feeling spreading through her as she watches them strategize so earnestly. Hours later, the children present their refined plan to the Duke. Albert reads the papers meticulously, one by one, while Eric fidgets nervously. Finally, the Duke looks up and declares the plan thorough, entrusting them with its deployment. He even gives them a head pat. A head pat, I tell you! The ultimate sign of approval! Once the children have left the office, Clarisse voices her concerns about their involvement. Albert assures her it's fine, mentioning casually that he himself went to war at their age. Whoa, so it's a family tradition of early experience. Marvin chimes in, reassuring her that they would never allow the boys to undertake anything truly dangerous for their age. Still, Albert admits to himself that there are plenty of gaps in their strategy, but for their age, it's impressively solid. Good job, Eric and Will! As for the magic stone, a new complication arises. The Count has formally requested to visit the Grand Ducal estate to check on Clarisse. Is he genuinely concerned for his niece, or is this a pretext to get closer to her stone? The days pass quickly, and William and Eric excuse themselves to begin their mission, leaving baby Theo fussy and upset over his big brother's absence. To cheer him up, Clarisse suggests they go out for a walk. But while she searches for his coat, Theo's mind begins to wander, concocting what one can only hope is not an escape plan, and just him entertaining himself like most babies do. Meanwhile, at the estate's entrance, Rusty greets the visitor with formal politeness. Mr. Count Nocturnal has arrived. Well, hope officially goes down the drain the moment Clarisse and Maria realize little Theo has unlocked the door all by himself. And just like that, the infant's grand adventure begins. He expertly hides under a table, only to face his greatest obstacle yet, the impossibly long staircase. Fortunately, he remembers reliable big brother Eric's most important lesson: always hold on to the rail. With sheer determination and surprising energy for the littlest kid in town, Theo successfully navigates each step. Hooray! But such hard work deserves a little treat, right? His tiny nose soon leads him on a new quest, sniffing the air for his absolute favorite dish: apple pie. Meanwhile, as Theo conceals himself inside a large vase filled with bushy flowers, Rusty caters to the eccentric Count Nocturnal. The Count snobbishly declines an offer of the pie, dismissing it as a dessert for commoners. Rusty feels a wave of livid anger at the comment, especially since they would have prepared a more suitable refreshment had the man arrived on the scheduled day. Leaving the old man to wait alone, as promised to the Duke, Rusty exits. Back to the Great Baby Escape, Theo now has his sights set on the glorious pie that awaits. Alone and impatient, the Count smirks, pleased that the Duke is busy. After all, he did arrive early on purpose. Weren't you just complaining about how late the Duke is? His smirk vanishes when he decides to sneak a tiny treat, only to slip on a slimy piece of pie on the floor. The culprit? An adorable infant who has once again vanished into thin air. Elsewhere, Clarisse catches a faint glimpse of the Count's voice but disregards it. Her sole priority is finding Theo. This isn't the young lad's first escapade, and they have numerous backup plans for this very moment. Yet, all their protocols are useless against an infant who is a little too brilliant for his own good. Their only real solution is his special bracelet, which allows Clarisse to sense its magic and locate him. But a sudden tiny scream of fear echoes from a nearby room. Theo, having wandered into an unknown space, is terrified that there's a monster inside. Thankfully, it's just Eric and William. William instantly lights the room with a soft, sunny glow to ease his fears. Theo cries out for his big brother, calling him by name, signifying his entire mission was just to find him. Aww. William proposes they play with the little guy to calm him down. Soon after, Clarisse and Maria find all three of them fast asleep on a mat, exhausted from their fun. Back on the other side of the estate, the Count finally meets with the Duke. Cutting straight to the point, he demands that His Grace call forth his niece immediately. In the midst of their colorful post-nap chaos, Eric wakes with a start, flustered to find Clarisse watching over them. She gently explains how she found them, thanks to the magical bracelet on Theo's wrist, the one containing a fragment of her magic stone. While William lightly teases a blushing Eric, Clarisse suddenly feels a faint, familiar magic humming within the room. Is this part of their plan against the Count? Her eyes even catch a suspicious string leading to a surprise above, but she decides not to pull it, not wanting to ruin the children's hard work. Before she can head out with a sleepy Theo in her arms, Eric stops her with a shy request: the upcoming Lantern Festival. He explains that every summer a festival is held where glowing butterflies light up the night sky. Sounds like it's straight out of a fairy tale. There's also a children's performance depicting the kingdom's origins, and both he and Theo have lead roles. Clarisse's mind immediately drifts to a la-la land of the two children dressed in adorable costumes, when she's abruptly cut off by a sharp mental tug. Soon after, Clarisse finds herself before the grumpy old troll, her uncle. She's been summoned and is now sitting beside the Duke, facing the Count in the drawing room. The atmosphere is icy. The Count aggressively demands her immediate return, along with her magic stone. Albert brushes him off with a calm yet firm reminder that she will only return when the contract ends. But Uncle Nocturnal smirks, reminding them there's only 1 month left on that very contract. That quick? A wave of solemn sadness washes over Clarisse at the thought of leaving. Unbeknownst to the adults, the children are eavesdropping from the hallway. Eric hears every word, his fists clenching. The tension peaks when the Count smugly adds that Clarisse has already arranged to be married upon her return. What? I object! A furious Eric, full of righteous anger, is about to burst into the room when William stops him, whispering that charging in now would only make everything worse. Even as the situation escalates behind the closed door, the two brothers share a silent, determined look. Right then and there, they make a vow to do everything in their power to protect the woman who feels like family. The tense discussion about Count Nocturnal's plans to wed Clarisse immediately is abruptly interrupted as Marvin enters the drawing room. His news is grave. A battle has erupted on the kingdom's borders. Recognizing this as a critical priority, the Duke decides to reschedule their unpleasant meeting. Yet, the old man wears a vile, knowing smirk. The war is clearly just a distraction. Even when Rusty kindly, and perhaps a bit sarcastically, invites him to stay for dinner, the Count has already deployed his men around the estate to search for the magic stone and the prince. Grr, when is the part where he will finally suffer? Excusing himself to the washroom, the Count is given directions by Rusty, along with a playful warning not to carelessly enter other rooms as they are cursed. The Count scoffs, not buying it for a second. Of course he doesn't, he's a big dummy. His search leads him to an encounter with an innocent-looking Eric. Is that even the right word for this child? The Count, however, sees only an opportunity. Guided by false information, he soon enters a specific room, convinced it holds what he seeks. The moment he steps inside, his foot slips on a strategically placed bar of soap. As he flails, his hand grabs a rope for balance, triggering a bucket that dumps a splash of purple paint all over him. This is the grand plan the children thought of? But the assault isn't over. The ultimate weapon arrives. Theo. The infant launches a cannonball of a stuffed toy directly at the precious crystals the Count wears. Oof. I mean, good job, our little one! Distracted and stuck to the ground by a hidden patch of goo, the Count is helpless as Eric unleashes his magic, manipulating a group of empty suits of armor to march toward him. The final reveal comes when William unmasks one helmet to reveal a monstrous, illusory face underneath. Poor Count, he lost a good amount of hair from the shock. He deserves it. The children, watching from the shadows, find the entire spectacle utterly amusing and burst into laughter. However, the humiliation fuels the Count's rage. Regaining his senses, he lunges and grabs Theo as a hostage. Thinking he has finally won his childish game, he is met with the cold, sharp tip of the Duke's sword at his throat and a voice dripping with lethal promise. Scared out of his wits, but still possessing a shocking amount of audacity, Count Nocturnal demands to know why the Grand Duke is here instead of commanding his forces at the border. Albert has no problem answering. He calmly explains that he trusts his knights implicitly, revealing that the Count's entire scheme was just another variable he had already accounted for in his own plans. Surprise, Counts? Let's rewind to the prior events. The moment the Duke postponed their meeting, he immediately convened with his army of knights, who are already prepared for such a diversion. The order was clear: show no mercy and demonstrate the true influence of the Grand Duke. While Rusty was creatively directing the Count to the restroom, Clarisse observed from a shadowy corner until the Duke joined her. After confirming she was comfortable with the children's involvement, the two used his invisibility magic to follow the Count. They watched as he took Eric's bait, led straight into the room of disaster. What a smart kiddo! Back in the present, the Count brushes off the explanation, mockingly questioning the Duke's title as the kingdom's protector. Albert offers no rebuttal. Such a petty diversion never required his personal presence. With a mere flick of his wrist, he uses his magic to fully apprehend the trapped man. On cue, Maria arrives to inform them that all of the Count's hidden assassins have been captured. Oh, to be a former skilled knight turned maid. Unable to muster any further insults under the Duke's icy gaze, the Count falls silent. Albert smirks down at him, revealing he was always aware of the plan and simply allowed it to proceed as a valuable real-life experience for the children. William steps forward, gloating as he declares he will personally report this vile situation to his father, the king. After the Count is taken away, Albert turns to the two boys. He proceeds to gently nag them about the sudden, unapproved changes to their plan, especially the involvement of a baby. But his stern expression soon softens. Nonetheless, he tells them he is proud. And was that a smile we spotted? Elsewhere, as he is led away, the Count makes a final desperate plea to Clarisse, begging her to free him as if it were all a simple misunderstanding. But Clarisse has had enough. It's time to end this once and for all. Clarisse confronts her uncle, demanding he atone for his sins. He insists he's innocent and deceived, pleading for her trust as family. Ew, gross! He even mocks her using her own father's words about family sticking together. He then insults her, claiming she'll always be undervalued by the ducal family and that only he is her true ally. This old man sure is vile! The ducal family arrives just then, with Eric passionately opposing him. Family isn't about blood, he declares, but love and care. Overwhelmed by this protection, Clarisse confesses her lifelong desire for a real family. She tried everything to appease her relatives, but received only dread and loneliness. She tells the Count she severs all ties with him. He wails that, by law, they are still family, and the Queen supports him. Why mention the Queen now? Does he think she'll still protect him? Dread dawns on him, but he has one final trick. He reveals that Clarisse's prearranged fiancé is a Queen supporter. The Duke instantly rebuts him. That marriage is void, he states coolly, because Clarisse is to become his wife. What? He produces a marriage contract as proof, adding that any alternative suitor must be of higher status than himself. An impossibility. After the chaos settles, Albert asks to stun Clarisse for a private conversation about their sudden engagement. Alone in the drawing room, Clarisse and Albert are unaware of the children and Rusty eavesdropping outside. Is our happy ever after happening? He quickly clarifies that the marriage declaration was just a tactic to silence the Count. The contract is a fake, though Rusty apparently has a real one ready. Not that they'll know. Rusty is their #1 shipper since day one. They agree to investigate the existence of her supposed fiancé. Despite the awkwardness, Albert casually compliments her. He says she'll make a good wife, citing how she cares for the children and brings ease to the household. He even admits she's the only woman he feels comfortable with. OMG, Albert, that is love! Flustered by his words, Clarisse accidentally spills hot tea on herself. As he tends to her hand with surprising delicacy, she tries to ignore the flutter in her chest, chalking his kindness up to his usual nonchalance. He confesses he has no plans to marry, feeling he is no good with women and wanting to protect Eric's place in the succession. Understanding completely, Clarisse tells him she only wishes for the ducal family's happiness, and that he deserves the best wife. Touched by her sincere words, he unconsciously holds her hand tighter and calls out her name with hope and yearning in his eyes.
And that's it for today, guys. What did you think? As always, don't forget to like the video and comment for the next part so we know you want more. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications for updates. See you in the next one!